Hello, everybody. This is Gary Miller. I am the guest host for Hired the Podcast, where we talk about all things employment, team building, and career progression. I'm excited to have with us today Joan Ryan. Joan is an author. She wrote a book recently called Intangibles that is about team chemistry that we're going to delve into. But I would also say that Joan was one of the first women to pave the way in sports writing, professional sports writing. I think that would make her a pioneer. And she found her way to San Francisco, where she had an illustrious career with the San Francisco Chronicle. Then went off to author some additional award-winning books, and currently is a media consultant for the San Francisco Giants. So welcome, Joan.
Thanks, Gary, and it's nice to see you again. I had the pleasure of meeting you in person and your entire team, and you invited me and allowed me to talk about my favorite topic, which is team chemistry, and I'm still absolutely, what's the word I'm looking for, Gary? Absolutely engaged and still learning about team chemistry. I just love it, and I thank you for giving me that platform. When was that? August?
It was last summer.
November?
But last summer, yeah. You were at our a great speaker for our summer meeting, but that's probably a good jumping off place because I'm wondering, how did it occur to you? When was the first time you had a notion that chemistry was something not only worth investigating, but ultimately writing a book about?
That's a great question, because the whole time I was writing sports, which started like in 1983 in Orlando, Florida, and then I moved in 1985 to San Francisco. And it wasn't like I never set out to write about sports, ever. But I liked sports. And early on in my career in Orlando, I was working on the editing desks in the newsroom. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get ahead in this profession, I better learn how to write. You know, I better have some writing experience so that I can run this newspaper someday. And so I thought, you know, some of the best writing day in and day out in every newspaper is in sports. And, you know, why is that? It's because we already know a lot of the characters, you know, and when you're covering a game, there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and there's usually some climactic moment that you can capture. So in sports is all there for good writing. So I did that, and I ended up falling in love with it. And it wasn't about the X's and O's ever. It was about the relationships. I just loved, you know, going into clubhouses and locker rooms and in press boxes and all of that, and just seeing the relationships. And it was mostly guys, you know, I was covering mostly professional sports, and it was mostly men, and just how they connected to each other. And, you know, the teasing and the, you know, the physical affection they would show each other. And so you could see in this subculture of male teams, you could see this this bonding that would happen with them. You could see this commitment they would have to each other. And that it did seem like the teams that had that just performed better. And it wasn't, though, until I attended the reunion of the 1989 Giants. And that was the team that, it was the Earthquake World Series. Everybody remembers that in 1989, the Giants versus the A's. And, you know, the A's ended up winning. But at the time, I loved that team, that 89 Giants. It was a cast of characters right out of Central Casting, you know. And I just loved going into that clubhouse and getting to know these guys and all the rest of it. And so now we go 20 years later to this reunion. And I'm working for the Giants by now, right? And so I go into the big tent out in the parking lot, and I walk in, and you see the guys, and they've got some, they're a little bit paunchier, a little balder, but almost every single player from that team showed up from all over the country. And as I'm walking in, saying hello to this person and the next, I mean, you could see it in their eyes and hear it in their voices that they still loved each other. So when I left that, and they talked about team chemistry, the best team chemistry they'd ever had. So when I was driving home, it occurred to me, I was thinking, we talk about team chemistry all the time, but I know for me, I never really thought about, well, what is it? Why does it elevate performance? What's going on among those guys that makes them better than just their talent? Because they weren't the most talented guys, and the most talented teams don't always win. And that's what got me started to ask 3 questions. Does team chemistry exist? Because this was like post Moneyball, and it was all about the analytics. And if it exists, what is it? And then third, how does it elevate performance?
So one of the first questions we asked, and I don't think we ever got to the answer, and that may be one of the things we're always pursuing. Our audience are mostly business people, leaders, managers, team leaders, hiring managers, and professionals wanting to join a great team. So, but in sports, it's like, you're on a stage, and the number of people that fight to get on that stage and the effort they have to put in to not only get there but to stay there is incredible. Right. And winning is everything. But in business, you can have a high-performance team, and you're not really in a league. So you can have a high-performance team that doesn't come in first place but still does really well. So, and conversely, you can have a lot of really high performers in a company, but the company doesn't do so well. So I'm curious how it translates into business. If you don't have it, can you create it? If you have it, how do you preserve it? Talk to me about your views from the business world.
Those are all the key questions. Absolutely the key questions, Gary. And so first we start and just we go way back to how our brains were developed. So baseball, football, and businesses, they're all teams. When really embrace that you are a leader of a team. You're not a leader of employees. It's a team. And what connects business teams is the relationship that they have with each other, and that the connection, the chemistry, is not about their employee-ness. That's not what connects them. It's their humanness. Always, always, always. That connects. Because just because you walk into an office doesn't mean you're no longer a human, that you're just an employee. So the way I look at it in all my research, and as you know, Gary, I researched this for 10 years, that what I learned very early on was that exploring team chemistry was actually exploring human nature. And so when we go back to when, humans first walked the earth, that our brains were wired right from the start to be tribal. Now, why is that? It's the only way that we were going to survive. We humans were little shrimps, compared to, the animals we had to kill in order to eat, the enemies we had out there, all of that. Every human being is born. I mean, there are exceptions, people with mental illness and that sort of thing, but we're wired to want to belong all of us want to belong. And when we think about it, how many tribes do we each belong to? A lot of tribes. You know, we've got our families, we've got our workplace, we've got our pickleball teams. You know, I mean, there's so many tribes that we want to belong to. So whether it's a sports team or a business team, it's recognizing, first of all, that you're tribal. And when I think about businesses, think about the bonding that they have to create. And how do you create bonding? It's trust, right? Everything we do in every relationship is trust. And, you know, Gary, as you know, because you're so good at this, is that there's only one way to build trust. And that's one interaction at a time. There are no big gestures, you know, like, and I'm not criticizing anything that, you know, teams, you know, companies do, but, you know, like the offsite where you're doing the ropes courses and all of that, you know, okay, it has an impact for a day or, you know, whatever, maybe a little bit more, but it's the day to day connection with other people that builds trust. And it's that trust. Once you have that trust, then you really bond with each other. And now you're getting to be really more of a team. And then once you trust and bond, the final pillar of chemistry is commitment. And it's really less about the commitment to purpose, but the commitment to each other. And then you've really got something going.
I didn't think this was going to be a motivational session for me personally, but thank you. That's very inspiring.
You're funny.
I'm going to go change all of our communication right now to say we have 29 humans, not 29 employees. But that's a start right there.
Exactly.
I thought that was funny too when you mentioned tribes. I've read about that a little bit, and I think the ideal tribe size was 80. I don't know where I read that or why I read that, but if it got much more than 80, a new tribe would. But I thought, wonder back then if the tribe leaders thought, you know, I need another hunter. I'm going to go call the next tribe and trade one of my gatherers for a hunter. I don't know if they did that. They tried to make the best of what they had.
Right. Well, and you know what's interesting about that, if I can insert this, is, and I love that idea. I mean, can you imagine what a sketch that would be, like on Saturday Night Live or something? You know, I'm going to trade 3 of my hunter-gatherers for, you know, a big guy that can go hunt down the bison or whatever. So one of the fascinating things that I observed, and I can't prove it scientifically, like most things in the book is proved scientifically. You know, our physiology and how we influence each other and all of that is all science. But this one was what I recognized. You know, I have my archetypes, and Gary, you're familiar with this, my 7 archetype characters that generally emerge in every good chemistry team. And when you mentioned that, oh gosh, you know, we need more hunters and gatherers and switching around, what I really believe is that a team that is starting to really mesh with their chemistry, the people they need, the roles that need to get filled. And let me explain that for a second. In my 7 archetypes, you know, like one of them would be the warrior, one of them might be a jester. Now, a player or a teammate in business can be a jester on one team and not be a jester when he moves on to a different team, because the team itself manifests what it needs if you're in a pretty good chemistry team. And so I saw that over and over and over again. And as I was trying to really say, God, you know, how does this work? I'd run these 7 archetypes by, you know, coaches and executives and players and all of that. And to a person, when I said, who on your team fills these 7 roles? And they could rattle it off right off the top of their heads. They recognized each archetype in their team. Now, certain people are going to be 3 of the archetypes. And there may be multiple of the same archetype in the team. But it is interesting that the team manifests what it needs, and those roles are filled.
We talked, I know you have a great chapter about Barry Bonds, and when he was pursuing home run titles, it was probably be very difficult for him not to be conscious of that. But in a lot of organizations, they're not like a company is, Acme Manufacturing with 100 employees. They got engineering, they got sales, they got marketing, they got operations, they got accounting, finance. And you could look at them as a team, but like in the sales organization, they're individuals and they're competing for stature, for top performance, or for recognition, which leads to potential advancement opportunities. Or when you sit at the executive table, you got the leaders of those different departments might be at a subconscious level vying for advancement potential to general manager or something like that. So there's individual achievement is very important in the business world. And
Absolutely.
It's not as important. Well, you can comment better than I. How important is, how does a professional on a team like that mesh their individual statistics and performance with the team performance?
Well, it's always the case, right? A team is made up of individuals. We're all individuals. We're all looking out for our own benefit because that's what we've been wired to do right from the start, right? We have to take care of ourselves. We want to take care of the tribe. So I do think, again, it's pretty similar in sports and in business because, you look at sports, of course, it's all the individual stats that people look at. I mean, a player is going to make a lot more money if his individual stats are really high. So you got to be conscious of that. Now, you also want your team to win because that elevates you as well. So it's always both. And I think that's true even for business. And even when we talk about salespeople, and they're almost like their own little company sometimes in some places, right? They're just trying to, create what they can create. But when you can encourage them, show them why it matters that they also connect with each other. Because when we're sitting in a silo, and I did this the 10 years I was writing that, book, is that you're sitting there by yourself and there's nobody else's energy you can pull from. And we need that. And I would go to Starbucks half the time just so I'd have some other energy around me and some other people, and I wasn't sitting there by myself. But writing the book was a total one-person job.
Sure.
But I needed other people. We need other people around us. So like in your company, you have so many incredible recruiters and is that what we call them? Recruiters?
Sure.
And
yep.
Sales. They're so good at what they do, yet they can make each other better. No single person has it all figured out, right? We need encouragement. We need ideas. We need to regenerate our energy. You can't do that by yourself, no matter how talented you are. You can't do it by yourself. So all of it, there's no either or here. All of it matters.
I think that made me think of something. If I could introduce 2 potential guests from the sports world, and I could say, well, here's John. He's been a member of 5 Super Bowl teams. And here's Bob. He was the leading rusher 4 times, but he never was on a championship team. Who would you want to learn from or hear stories from? And I think, well, certainly most leaders would want to talk to the first guy. I'll throw something out there that our listeners, it's a very popular topic these days, of course. It is maybe the most popular topic is work from where. And, you know, 5 years ago, the office environment, that's where the buzz was. That's where the energy was highest. And now a lot more people are working from home. Work from anywhere, team chemistry, how do they go together?
Boy, that is the question of our times right now, isn't it? I have several thoughts on that. One is that there's an upside to Zooming and working remotely. One is that in some ways, we might get to know our colleagues a little better because we can have some insight into their lives at home if we are Zooming, right? Because you get to see a photo on the back, you know, in the wall, and we're like, oh, who's that? Sure. And the cat jumping on their thing. And we're seeing them quite human. And we're also, you know, just glimpsing into their lives and getting to know them a little bit. And the other thing I like about Zoom and working remotely is that we're sitting still. We're not walking around or heading out to this, that, or the other thing. We're maintaining eye contact. We have to speak one at a time. We're not all jumping into the conversation. So there's a lot that works by working remotely. However, in the long run, I think most human beings are at their best in a group, right, with each other. Again, it's sharing information. It's just connecting on a personal level. You know, being that human person. And I mean, our brains are much more fertile when we have people giving us ideas and introducing us to things we don't already know or would never be exposed to. And so I do think in the long run, there could be, and probably will be, a decline a little bit maybe in performance because of that. You know, we just can't keep ourselves motivated all the time.
Sure.
Now, I could be wrong. We haven't tried this experiment, but I just don't see how in all of evolution, you know, we've been wired, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So we're always going to be tribal beings.
Digital tribes, I don't know. But to your point, though, talking with you directly today, I've already found some tremendous inspiration and some ideas that I otherwise would not have had. I wouldn't have even met you if there wasn't a pandemic. So who's to say
That's true.
How things will evolve, and we may get to career and nirvana, or we may feed the world through a different path that we didn't think of earlier. Talk to me about oxytocin, that chemical, and how it's released and where it comes from.
Yeah, good question. I mean, this goes back to how our brains were wired right from the start. And one of the things, as I mentioned, that we had to develop was bonding and trust, right? And so our brain, in order for us to survive, because we had to stay together as tribes and look out for each other, or else we'd be wiped off the face of the earth. So our brains evolved to produce actual chemicals that helped foster that trust and that connection with each other and that instinct to just want to belong. And one of those chemicals is oxytocin. So when we show trust to each other, when we, like physically, touching each other, looking in each other's eyes, that connection we feel with each other, that is a result of oxytocin. And it evolved over time. And I just found that so fascinating, that how our brains just, over 3 million years, it tripled in size, our brains. So compared to other creatures, mammals, our brains are so much bigger proportionally than everybody else. And when we think about, why did it get so big? Why did it need all that extra space? And it was not for our intellectual wiring, which is what we often think, because we're the most intellectual, the smartest creatures on the face of the earth, or so we assume. But it was for all the social wiring. Because that literally is what keeps us alive. To this day, it's the social wiring that keeps us alive. And in the book, Gary, and you know this, I cite these studies, one about the orphans back in the last century, turn of the century, in Europe, where there were, disease and all kinds of things. So the doctors told the caretakers of these babies in these orphanages not to touch them or even interact with them, except to feed them and change them, keep them clean. And in fact, they even put, plastic sheets between each of the bassinets to keep the disease down. Well, there was more sickness than ever before, and deaths, because what they discovered, 4 decades later, because the doctors were just flummoxed, like, we're doing the best we can and more babies are dying. In one place, every baby died, even though they were being fed and being kept clean. And 4 decades later, they found out that, babies need touch, and they need to be seeing another's face and the smile, and, again, feeling like they are being taken care of, and it's the touch and the voice of a mother, the beating heart of a caretaker. And once they changed all that, the babies thrived, but we don't thrive without each other.
Well, that goes back to the isolation of working from home, because I think people send off energy into the universe. You and I are probably communicating in ways right now that we don't even comprehend, whether we were sitting in the room together or we're here, 2,000 miles apart. But we can't touch each other. We can't high five or anything like that. That's the only thing missing, and I guess it remains to be seen if that'll be an issue here. Like you said, we have yet to find out. I have a question, 2 more things I want to talk about. You told the great stories about Johnny Gomes, who was I'll call him a good player, but not known as a phenomenal player. Is that a fair assessment?
Very fair.
And he had a record of many of the teams that he was on were winning teams. You attribute some of his energy to making those teams better. So I'd like to, comment that if you would, but what if there isn't somebody, I'm a manager of a sales team and I don't have a Johnny Gomes. Can I make one? Can I coach one? Or do I have to find one?
Well, I think there's a little bit of all of that. Now, Johnny Gomes was a guy, as you mentioned, just had that. He was the spark plug of a team. He just loved, this is in baseball, he just loved baseball so much, and he just loved his teammates. And part of that was, he grew up without a father, and his mother, had some issues. And so his teammates in baseball from the time he was a kid were his family. And so anytime he went to a team in the major leagues, which was shocking that he ever made it in the major league, those guys immediately became his family. So there was that. Now, how does he make the team better? Because it is uncanny how many times he would go on a team and they would win. I mean, I think he has 3 World Series rings from three different teams, and he's like a 232, lifetime hitter. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that his teammates believed in him so much, and they believed he made them better. And I went to a neuroscientist and I said, okay, look, there's this guy, Johnny Gomes, and he wins, World Series and that sort of thing, but he's really not a good player. And, I said, why, what is going on physiologically that allows him to elevate the performance of his teammates? I don't understand the science of it. And he said, well, did his teammates play better when he was on the field? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, that's what you see. And then he said, did they win? And I said, yeah, they won. And he said, well, there's your scientific evidence. In your own eyes. He said, why do people not trust their own eyes? That yes, there is a connection because it continued to happen and happen and happen. And so it's basically, then we talked about the placebo effect. When we take medication that we think is going to ease our pain, even if it's a placebo, our brain registers our belief that, number one, this is a real pill and that it's going to make me feel better. And so our brain responds to what we're believing. So it actually releases like pain-killing chemicals in our brain as it would if like they got a pill or something. And so like there's a real physiological response to a placebo. So if you believe something enough, a lot of this stuff happens, and people say, well, that doesn't make any sense. So the same people that dismiss that are the ones that believe in the yips. And most of us know about the yips, from golf.
Sure.
It means that, you can't make a putt anymore because your brain is just like gone, somewhere else. And they'll always accept that the yips are real. Say, well, if the negative action from your brain is real, why wouldn't the positive one be real as well?
Sure.
And one of the players I interviewed, this pitcher named Jake Peavy, was a guy, and I don't know if you remember this from the book, Gary, but he was this stomper and snorter on the mound, and he just gave 100% every pitch he made. I mean, he was a joy to watch in that way because he was like almost putting on a show. But every single pitch. And so I asked him, and he believed in team chemistry. And I said, so Jake, why would team chemistry matter to your performance? Because you're giving 100% already. And as we all know, you can't give more than 100%. That's all we have to give. And he gave me the best line in my book, which I did not write, this line. He said, my teammates bring out a fight in me I can't willingly summon for myself. So he drew something from them that is beyond what his own talent was. That could not be drawn from him any other way than from his teammates. He couldn't do it himself. And there's this whole part in the book, about this concept of open loops, that we all have open loops that only someone else can complete. And again, circle back to how our brains developed, during caveman days. We are always, always, always dependent on other people to be our complete best selves.
You don't realize this, Joan, but you just did a great commercial for the recruiting business, because I knew the Jake Peavy story. I read the Jake Peavy story. I made a LinkedIn post about the Jake Peavy quote, so I know it. But yet to hear you tell the story still moved me. And so a great recruiter is going to tell a story about a company in a way that moves the potential employee, even though they may know about the company, they still have to be drawn in. So thank you for sharing that. I want to close with one other concept here, because I love the story about Barry Bonds and Jack Kemp?
Jeff Kent.
Jeff Kent.
Yeah.
That they were, there's a lot of teams where great chemistry, where you think chemistry is everybody gets along and is kumbaya and going out to dinner and sharing family photos and all that. And yet those two guys rubbed each other the wrong way, if I recall, and yet still were phenomenal performers. So comment on that, where you've got, in a sales organization, for example, you've got rivals. How do you make that, how do you make 1 + 1 = 3?
Right. And this was a real revelation to me. This was this aha moment that, as a journalist, you always love that. You love to be wrong. You go in with an assumption and then you get this other thing. It's like, oh, wow, that's what's actually happening. So with Barry Bonds and Jeff Kent, for those who don't know baseball, were both on the Giants, San Francisco Giants. And each one was a great player. Bonds, of course, most extraordinary, and Jeff Kent, a really great player. And in fact, tonight, the day we're recording this, we'll find out if Jeff Kent made it into the Hall of Fame. She probably won't, but he was that good. But anyway, so they could not stand one another. One sat in one end of the clubhouse, the other sat in the other end of the clubhouse. They had a fist fight on TV in the dugout.
Oh,
they just literally could not stand each other. So, and I was thinking, God, that's so bad for chemistry, whatever, that they were going to be my representatives in the book. As Johnny Gomes was a super carrier of chemistry, these guys were the super disruptors of chemistry. Well, I found out that wasn't the case at all. Yes, they hated each other. They weren't going out to dinner with any of their teammates, much less each other. But what I did recognize finally was that after interviewing each one of them separately for 3.5 hours, Jeff Kent said to me, there is nobody I would rather have on the field with me every game than Barry Bonds. And then Barry Bonds, much to my surprise, unprompted, said the exact same thing about Jeff Kent. And it made me realize that there are different kinds of chemistry. Jeff Kent and Barry Bonds had great chemistry on the field. They had that kind of chemistry. They rooted for each other on the field. And even in that instance where they had a fight in the dugout, the next time, I think it was Barry Bonds who was up and he had a home run. Jeff Kent was the first guy on the stairs leaving the dugout to welcome and high five Barry Bonds. Because the two of them recognized in each other that each one cared 100% for their craft. They prepared themselves better than anyone else on that team. I mean, like these are the guys that would like chew through a leather catcher's mitt if it thought it would give them, just a little bit more, a better chance to win. So they respected the hell out of each other, but they couldn't stand each other. And I came to call this task chemistry. They had incredible chemistry in their tasks. It's the same thing in business. There may be people in your company, on your team, who can't stand each other, would never go out to lunch with each other, don't have any like regular conversations, but you want them on your team because they're so good at what they do and they care so much about what they do. And it just opened opened my mind to there's probably a lot of different kinds of chemistry. Once we study and really watch, but task chemistry, and then the one that most of us have is social emotional chemistry.
Well, maybe we'll discover that in Intangibles Part 2.
Well, I hope there's somebody out there willing to write it, because it ain't going to be me.
Well, you've made a great contribution to society. I do have one last thing I'm going to ask you to just make mention of. My audience, our audience, we have our team, we have 100,000 plus connections on LinkedIn. Like I said, most of them are business people. Many of them have young families. I believe you also wrote a book about young girls in gymnastics and figure skating and things like that. It was called, I'll let you describe the book, but it was one of the top 100 sports books of all time, I believe. And if any of our listeners have children in sports, young training in sports, especially individual competitions, I'm going to ask you to research this book. Joan, you want to make a comment on that and what it's about?
Sure. It's called Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, The Making and Breaking of Elite Gymnasts and Figure Skaters. And it truly is about only the elite figure skaters and gymnasts, because both sports are fantastic and you want your children in those sports. But when it gets to the elite stage, there is so much abuse from the coaches, eating disorders, injuries, horrible injuries, stress and pressure. And gymnastics was way worse than the figure skating. And when that book came out, tons of attention, but truly it wasn't until the Larry Nassar case when, that huge scandal several years ago, where the gymnasts themselves came forward instead of a journalist like me, but all the gymnasts themselves came forward and were very open and honest about the abuse they received from this one trainer. Of course, he's not the only one.
Sure.
And I think that will change for the better, because these gymnasts won't allow gymnastics to continue to be the damaging sport that it became.
Oh, thank you for commenting on that. I'm sure that could be helpful to somebody. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to Joan Ryan. If you are a manager, coach, leader, team leader, or an aspiring professional interested in being part of a great team and contributing, check out the book Intangibles. Grab a copy, download it to your Kindle, or listen away. So, Joan, thank you so much for sharing with us today some of your insights there. I think we could go on and on because I have plenty more questions, but it's been great. So, again, thank you, everybody. Joan Ryan. Thank you, Joan.
Thanks, Gary, and hope our paths cross again soon. I'd love to catch up with you and your team. sometime in the near future.
Well, I invited you to a White Sox baseball game. You said that was the last thing you wanted to do. So maybe you take me to a Giants game on my next trip to Napa.
Let's do that.
Okay. All right, everybody. This is Gary Miller, the guest host, substituting for the famous Travis Miller on this edition of Hired, the podcast. Please check it out anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and watch for some video clips on LinkedIn and YouTube. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.